So a typical biomanufacturing facility is as large as a shopping mall. And it's very expensive to actually plant that facility to get it built and qualified for regulated production of something like a therapeutic. So a big part of Sunflower's mission and goal is to build technologies, including equipment that can be smaller, so more right-sized, and that have a level of automation and intuition that makes them ready for deployment anywhere, whether a location has significant expertise in biomanufacturing or not.
Hi, I'm Emma Zareen, your host and a 16-year-old engineering student, policy enthusiast, and hopeful future STEM school survivor. Welcome to She Persists. Before we dive in, I just want to take a second to say how grateful I am for each of you. Every listen and every bit of support genuinely means the world to me. When I started She Persists, it started as a little dream to share real stories of young girls in STEM who are challenging norms, finding their place, and inspiring change. Seeing that idea come to life has been so rewarding, and honestly, it's just the beginning. If you've been enjoying these conversations, I'd love for you to be a part of our community by following this podcast. It's one of the best ways to help us grow, share even more incredible stories, and connect with a wider audience. And I hope the conversation doesn't end here. I hope you carry these stories with you and let them be a constant reminder that your voice truly makes a difference. In today's episode, I'm joined by Dr. Kerry Love, scientist, entrepreneur, and CEO of Sunflower Therapeutics, a biotechnology company focused on making biologic medicine manufacturing more accessible around the world. Throughout the episode, we talk about what it actually means to democratize access to healthcare, the challenges behind vaccine manufacturing and distribution, and how Sunflower is working to build smaller, more accessible biomanufacturing systems that can be deployed globally. We also talk about Dr. Love's journey from being a researcher and bench scientist to becoming a CEO, what it was like leading a new biotech company through COVID, and the lessons she's learned navigating STEM and entrepreneurship as a woman. She shares incredible insight into balancing science, leadership, motherhood, and business, while also talking about the importance of mentorship, persistence, and building systems that empower communities rather than create dependency. I loved this conversation because it blended extremely complex science and global health issues with such honest and personal reflections about leadership, resilience, purpose, and change in science. So with that, let's get into it. Here is Dr. Kerry Love. All right, so welcome to the She Persists podcast. I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Kerry Love today and hear about all of her experiences. Ms. Kerry, welcome to the show. And to start, could you just introduce yourself in your own words, who you are, what you're currently working on, and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Emma. It's awesome. I'm Kerry. I'm a scientist entrepreneur. I'm a Boston-based scientist trained as an organic chemist, but I've been working in the biomanufacturing field for the last 15 to 20 years. As I mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started multiple businesses. I get really excited about translating technology or science from academic labs and discovery into actual commercial products. So I've been working as the co-founder and leading the business as CEO at Sunflower Therapeutics the last 6 to 7 years. Love to tell you more about that. We build biomanufacturing infrastructure, so both hardware and bioprocesses for making all kinds of bio-derived products. Things like therapeutics, foodstuffs, bioindustrial enzymes. So yeah, excited to
Yeah.
talk more.
That all sounds incredibly exciting, and I'm so excited to hear about all of it later in this episode. Sunflower Therapeutics focuses on democratizing access to protein manufacturing. For someone who's hearing that phrase for the first time, can you talk a little bit about what this actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, in most places in the world, particularly in the global south, there's actually quite limited capacity for biomanufacturing. And what do I mean by that? That means that there just aren't the same kind of facilities for producing important consumer goods, like I said, like therapeutics, right? So biologic drugs, vaccines, even foodstuffs, using biomanufacturing or biotechnology. So that capacity is quite limited, like the physical infrastructure for it. One of the reasons that it's limited is because it's usually very, very large, right? So a typical biomanufacturing facility is as large as a shopping mall. right? And it's very expensive to actually plant that facility to get it built and qualified for regulated production of something like a therapeutic. So a big part of Sunflower's mission and goal is to build technologies, including equipment that can be smaller, right? So more right sized and that have a level of automation and intuition that makes them ready for deployment anywhere, whether a location has significant expertise in biomanufacturing or not. And that's actually really critical to ultimately deploying biotechnology in a location like the Global South. Right. So love to talk more, but ultimately that kind of access through democratization, right, is going to be really critical to countries having sovereignty over their own healthcare needs.
Yeah, and I think what you're doing in other fields of STEM too, that's so important to make sure that, STEM not only exists, but it's accessible. Because, that's like the biggest part. If people can't access it and it can't help people, then, what's really the point? I think that's such a great thing that you're doing and such a great movement. I'm excited to hear more. You've been a researcher, a co-founder, a program manager, and now a CEO. At what point did you realize you wanted to branch out a little bit from science and become a businesswoman and share your expertise with the world in that way?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's by default, to be honest with you. For me, I did not necessarily intend to go be a CEO. Like you said, I was a researcher, love being a bench scientist. I really, really enjoyed it. And frankly, it was kind of sad when I ultimately realized that the way to grow my career was to step away from the bench and start managing other scientists and supporting their roles in the lab and ultimately their career growth. It's hard, right? You move from kind of the doing to the overseeing, and then I think you have to have a mind shift of like, what does that actually mean? And so for me, I had to really learn to take joy in other people's successes and in other people's both personal and professional growth, right? But in terms of being a CEO, it was kind of in many ways for my role at Sunflower, it was a bit by default. I think I had, all the skills from a technical perspective to do it. It was really like we needed someone to lead the business. And among my co-founders, I was like the person who could do it. So I took it on and I didn't necessarily know exactly what I was getting into. I took this role as CEO in February of 2020, a month before COVID. I had no idea what was about to happen, just like the rest of the world. And so, yeah, so it was a big shock. But my training as a PhD student and then running research and things after that really helped me understand how to plan, how to budget, how to manage people. And so all of those things, little by little, I kind of just found my way. But yeah, it wasn't like, I think I'd like to be a CEO. Like it wasn't like that at all. It was basically like, oh my gosh, this business isn't gonna happen if someone doesn't take this on. And I'm so passionate about the mission. I'm gonna have to do this.
Yeah, and I think, like what you were saying a little bit earlier, that's such a big thing about research and science is having that shift between like, being at the forefront of really doing and then also being able to translate that into teaching others and then like expanding your knowledge so that other people can grow from it too. So I think that's such a great thing that you're doing. You just mentioned COVID. So you became CEO in February of 2020. And then, the whole COVID pandemic affected us for a couple of years. So suddenly that exact problem that you've been working on became globally urgent.
Yeah, live issue.
Yeah, it became like a huge thing all over the world. What was that moment like from your perspective?
I mean, it was like almost like wonderful, terrible, right? Especially since right away I started working with a group of researchers in South Africa. So, starting in April of 2020, I started aligning with a group of researchers at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research based in Pretoria, South Africa. And they were tasked with doing a lot of their COVID response effort in South Africa. And that just gave me a front row seat to the incredible challenges that the African continent that they had during the pandemic and continue to have to provide healthcare for their population. So, I mean, that was kind of the biggest thing, right? Learning that Africa imports, almost 100% of their health and wellness products, including personal protective equipment from outside. They literally they don't make anything for themselves, right? They have fill finish sites that break bulk that comes in externally, but they don't actually make any of their bulk drug substance. I think they make one vaccine. It's yellow fever. It's made into car. So just getting educated during the pandemic about like not only what does this mean for us here in the US or in the global north, because obviously we had significant logistical and supply and health challenges, but it's a totally different challenge when you have no ability to make for yourself. So not only just kind of seeing this in the news, but literally having a front row seat to it, speaking with my colleagues in Africa on weekly, sometimes daily basis. It was so eye-opening and it just fueled the passion both for me and for my staff. Like, we just have to keep going, like whatever that means, one foot in front of the other, because this is a situation that needs to be remedied. Africa never reached 60% population vaccination for COVID. That's significant, right? You can't have herd immunity if you don't reach a high level, typically exceeding 80% population vaccination. And largely it's because the product is not accessible to them because accessibility is both cost and availability and it's too expensive and they can't make it for themselves right now. So yeah, so both interesting but frustrating, right? So I think that was kind of my biggest COVID experience. As far as the business went, right, we had to learn to be super agile, right? We use all the Google tools. So like we had to learn like how to do everything remote and interact really efficiently and how to do all of those things. But it was also just really hard as a small business to get the things that we needed because we were competing for supplies with like ultra large businesses. And like nobody cares about filling an order for like 10 bioprocess bags when like some other company's ordering 1,000, right? Like, so there were a lot of just logistical challenges too.
Yeah, I think what you were talking about South Africa a little bit ago, I think it's really easy to, just kind of look out onto something that's happening and be like, "Oh, like that's really unfortunate. And like I wish we could do something that help." But then it's another thing to actually be there and actively see what's going on and be really involved in it. And I think that just really changes a lot of perspective on the outlook of what's actually happening in some of these places that we don't always
Absolutely.
appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Seeing is believing, Emma.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that to people all the time because I often encourage people, like, come see our labs, come see what
Yeah.
we do. Like, seeing is believing. I totally agree. Traveling to Africa has been really important and informative for me. I've been to Africa 4 times in the last 4 years and for as long as a month at a time. Actually, when the pandemic happened, I was with one of my staff. She didn't yet work for me because she was just finishing her PhD, and she and I were in Argentina.
Oh my gosh.
And we
Wow.
were there to do work with an agricultural technical institute in Argentina,
So
and
exciting.
we just about didn't make it home. So it was a little too exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
So we were literally like on the ground seeing kind of what was happening as all of this was unfolding. So going these different places and seeing how they, are working to manage their own healthcare situations with oftentimes, limited physical or personal resources is really important to really understanding how you can contribute to the solution, right?
Yeah, and I actually had no idea that Africa still hadn't reached 60% of vaccination. That's insane, and I feel like we often don't recognize things like that enough, and really step back and be like, "Oh, fortunately, we do have most of these resources in Northern America." So being able to, like, recognize that and seeing that we can use that to help other people is I think that's a really great thing that your company is doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll throw another fact out there while we're talking about this, especially for us as women. Africa has significant problem with cervical cancer, right? So
Yes, I have heard
HPV is a
that.
huge problem in Africa across the continent. They, as a population, have 2 to 3 times the cervical cancer burden that we have here in the US. Only 15% of adolescent girls across the continent are vaccinated, and no boys are vaccinated, basically. So, like, this is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's a really expensive product. And part of that has to do with the way it's manufactured. So I mean, really we have to collectively rethink how are we going to address these healthcare needs? How can we lower the cost of goods manufactured, but also work on aspects of distribution channels and regulatory strengthening? Like all of it has to work together. But that's really sobering when you think like there is something available and it's just not getting there.
Yeah, and I think that's such a big thing about research too, is there's often we're making like these new findings and we have these discoveries, but about like actually implementing them into places that need them the most. I think that's really important, and that's definitely something that a lot of researchers are working towards right now, is helping like address these issues in less fortunate countries. So I think that's great. We have a better sense of who you are now and what you're working on, but the path you took to get here is incredible. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, just to start off. So, in college, you were a competitive rower and you were also deep in science. And both of these fields were not always exactly super welcoming to women. You had mentioned, I think, in a previous interview that you had done, that because of a lack of opportunities for female athletes, you chose to focus more on science. How did you actually come about like making that decision and choosing which one to commit to?
Yeah, it's a great question. I super identify as an athlete, right? I was a three-sport high school athlete and a rower in college. And at some point, though, you have to make these choices. And particularly science, if you are going to pursue that wholeheartedly, I mean, you just need to, frankly, you need to have the grades. You need to have the time to commit to the lab hours and, pursuing independent research. And I could just see that, like, I was a fine athlete, but there's not professional path for that. Like, wasn't like a superstar, right? I mean, I loved it. And I had already had to make some of those hard decisions even going into college, right? I had the ability to play field hockey at one of those colleges that I was admitted to, but I didn't feel like it was going to give me the educational opportunities that I had when I chose to go to the University of Virginia. Like, I could just tell that was going to be overall a better educational experience. So I had kind of already had to make these choices even going into college. And so, when I saw like, okay, I really have to have more time to just commit to this because this is my passion, um, then I made that decision. But I never gave up sport. I mean, you can see I'm all red faced because I just went to the gym. But yeah, I mean, I'm a lifelong athlete, right? So I still played basketball and racquetball and softball on different like club teams or just for fun or with my friends or with my partner who's now my spouse. But yeah, but it's hard. You unfortunately you can't do everything, right? And not at the same level, right? You can do a lot of things for enjoyment, but you can't do everything for like peak excellence, right?
Yeah, and I think that's such a hard realization to make, is that, you know, you can have so many avenues of passion, but it's always very important to realize like the value of making hard choices and hard decisions and being able to really say like, this is what I want my number one focus and my number one priority to be. Although you definitely don't have to let go of those other passions. Like you said, you still play sports, you still like are very active, go to the gym. So I think, yeah, it's hard to make decisions like that, but also recognizing that those are eventually the things that lead you to those greater successes is super important. You mentioned you went to UVA and then you went to MIT for your PhD, and then you did work with the Harvard Medical School for postdoc. So that's a long like stretch of staying very deep in science. Was there ever a time that you felt like you might want to pursue something else, or kind of what was your path throughout these educational experiences?
Yeah, I have 2 speeds on and off. So, I mean, there's ups and downs in anything that you do, right? But I have always been a passionate scientist. I mean, even now as I run my business, I am very deep into the technical aspects of the business or even the like nitty-gritty of how we design certain kinds of experiments because it really touches my expertise and like people have really specific expertise. So sometimes I have to contribute in that way and I love it. No, I think I was just kind of like, no, this is what I want to do. I know that I'm passionate about science. I know that I really love being a translational scientist. And so yeah, I mean, you get discouraged when things don't work in the lab, but I don't think I ever thought that I was going to do something different. I think the only time when I kind of really questioned any of that was after I had my first child, right? And my identity changed a bit. Now I wasn't just, a scientist and a wife. I was a mom. And I had to really think like, what is this? How am I gonna do this? Right. But I mean, to be honest, like I was actually a scientist first. And that was just a part of my identity that I couldn't give up. So in the same way that having a child is kind of an experiment, being a working mom is also kind of an experiment. I was like, I'm just gonna try all of this together and see how it goes. Just kind of one day at a time, 1 year at a time. And sometimes it's really hard. And sometimes you feel like you're letting your work down. And sometimes you feel like you're letting your family down. But ultimately, just kind of learning over time, what does that like work life integration look like? I hesitate to call it balance. It's really integration. And yeah. And then little by little, just kind of figuring it out. Right. But yeah, I think there was at no time that I was like, I have to quit all of this and do something totally different. Never.
No, I really like what you just said about work-life integration and not balance. I feel like balance can often have like the connotation of being you're doing one while the other's paused, and then doing the other while the other's
That's
paused,
right.
going back and forth. So I think integration is a really good word to use there, because it really is about connecting all aspects of your life and not just honing in on one and kind of like ignoring the others while you're just trying to like flip flop between them. But yeah, so you co-founded your first company, Enumeral, using technology that you helped develop at MIT. What did that first entrepreneurship experience teach you that stayed with you later when you founded Sunflower Therapeutic?
Oh, that's a great question. It was a super challenging experience, Emma. It was my first business. I had not started a business before. I was effectively a scientist going into that. And there were just a number of challenges, both just because of the time in my life that happened. I founded the business and then I helped operationalize it when I was 6 months pregnant with my second child. So that had challenges associated with it. We founded that business and made some decisions about the way we financed it that kind of accelerated the clock on the need for the business to be productive and cash generative. And that was challenging too. So those were wonderful learning experiences. Right. I mean, the management team that I was working with was in many ways like perpendicularly oriented to the scientific founders. And that's hard, right? Like you can't make something go that has never existed before, like a startup without total alignment. A lot of those experiences were literally just hard. But I think, the learning that I got out of that was no, I really want to do this a totally different way if I ever do it again. And, part of that was why I was really reluctant to actually take over the CEO role at Sunflower because I was like, no, that's not for me. But then as I realized that I could take all of that experience and actually put into place something at Sunflower that was totally different. That was actually really attractive and ultimately has been incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, I think that's also a really interesting thing is that experiences don't always have to teach you like how to approach something. It can also teach you how you don't want to approach something,
Mhm.
how you want to do things differently, or what worked, what didn't work. So yeah, I think it's always important to like extract all of those different key aspects of like an experience other than just the positive ones. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. So I'd love to get into your actual company right now, Sunflower Therapeutics. I have a bunch of questions about so
Sure.
first off, what was your initial inspiration to start Sunflower Therapeutics? Kind of, how did this idea actually initialize of you starting a business out of this passion?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to be part of the team that was funded by DARPA for the Biologically Derived Medicines on Demand program. There was a group of us at MIT. So my partner, who's also my co-founder and my life partner, Chris Love, he is faculty in the chemical engineering department at MIT. So he received this award, and then I came on to help technically manage that program. The whole goal of that program at MIT was really to show people that you could, in fact, make biologic drugs in a box, in a concept that was not unlike a vending machine or a Keurig or right that you could take everything that kind of currently exists in like large scale biomanufacturing, shrink it down to the bench and actually do it. So I was fortunate enough to be part of that team and had a large role in the technical development of that approach, which was just super awesome and fun and challenging. And, it matched so much with, I think, my kind of personal passions and Chris's as well. I mean, we just have deep unction for people who suffer, right? I mean, we want to alleviate suffering however we're able. And we're scientists, and this is the way we can do that. So, this is what we're going to do, right? And we just believe really strongly, as we were talking about before, about how accessible technology ultimately translates into healthcare solutions, right? So after we kind of went through the process of developing and demonstrating this technology at MIT and kind of did everything you can do in an academic setting to show that something is possible, then we co-founded the business, Chris and I together with actually a third co-founder, Catherine Golden, who was also an MIT person. She was at Sloan at the business school at the time. And so the three of us who really shared this passion for kind of global healthcare and accessible manufacturing decided, okay, it's time. Like we're gonna figure this out and get this business started. But I think it comes again, all three of us from a deep passion both for using technology to fill real life needs and just wanting to alleviate suffering, however we're able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's such an incredibly important quality of a scientist is having that drive to like want to help shape others and help, aid them in their in places that they would need help in developing like new technologies or new research and stuff like that. So I think that's really cool that you guys got to take that passion and really use it in the real world and apply it. So yeah. So can you walk us through what Sunflower Therapeutics actually does? Like if I were a country trying to manufacture vaccines with limited resources, what would working with your team look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, it kind of depends on what the needs are and what the current capability, both in terms of like physical infrastructure and human capital, are in the area. We do a lot of different kinds of work, Emma. So, as a business, we kind of have two main business units. One is the part of the business that develops the equipment approach, and that is right sized equipment for bioprocess execution, right? So, this is like physical hardware, things like fermentation equipment and bioreactors and purification trains and formulation. So we build that equipment and we can deliver to customers. And then we all build effectively the biology that goes into that. So we also do things like cell line development and purification process development and end-to-end process execution. So we kind of have these two components. And we do both of those things for diverse customers, right? Some customers already build their own bioprocesses and they already do things kind of the same way we do, and we just sell them hardware. And then some people actually need everything. They need equipment and a process, right? So if we were working, for example, with a government or an NGO, we could help deploy physical equipment that would actually make something like a vaccine component. And we could also develop the process for that. So that would be the cells that express the product of interest, usually a protein, the process that purifies it, right, that renders it effectively a druggable compound and kind of everything there. And then work with them to make sure that we're documenting that process in a way that their local regulatory authorities can actually understand, review, and, work toward the clinical evaluation of that product.
Yeah, and I think that's also something that's so important is what you just said, working with them as opposed to working for them. I think especially in like developing countries or places that you're helping, it's really important to realize that, it brings a certain value, of course, to help like do work for them, but it brings a whole different value to actually help them become a more self-sustained country and allow them to build the infrastructure to actually maintain that work after you're not helping them anymore. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's two components to this. So I'm gonna take this for a minute, Emma, because I think this is really important, and I appreciate that you recognize like how critical this is, right? Because that's what ultimately sustains this whole process. And the healthcare aspect, like don't get me wrong, this is critically important. But when you do it in a certain way in region for region, you're also talking about wealth creation. Right. So, actually, our preferred way to do this is actually to start a business in region for region, to start a joint venture. And we've actually done this. So we have a business that Sunflower is part shareholder of that's based in Pretoria, South Africa. So it's called Matumaini Therapeutics. And the goal of that business, because it's currently fundraising for its own operationalization, the goal is to use aspects of Sunflower's technology along with their own local know-how. Because I want to be clear, South Africa knows a lot about how to make biotechnology products. They are extremely knowledgeable and well trained, right? They need certain aspects of support, and that's where we can come in and support with bioprocessing infrastructure and some of our know how. But the goal is that we're going to do it together in the context of a locally operating business that also delivers jobs and income earning opportunities along with those healthcare products in region. So that, frankly, that is my preferred way to do this. Because local businesses sustain social change, right?
Yeah,
Like small
exactly.
businesses, that's how that works. So I mean, even here in the US, like small businesses are what actually create and sustain social change. So yeah, that's the way I would really like to do this because it's a how do we do it together, not a like, come, let me do this for you. No, I don't know the region, right?
Yeah,
Like my co-founders in Montumeni, they're South Africans because
yeah.
they know what they need. Like I'm there to help, right? So that is the way that I would like to continue doing this in other regions.
Yeah, and I kind of add to that a conversation that I've had in the past that I really thought was really interesting. So it's really important to realize that if someone in that country sees someone from their own country being able to make that change, it's also really inspiring for the next generation to be like, hey, like we have the ability to do this as like a South African, or we have the knowledge and now the infrastructure to be able to do this ourselves versus when someone comes in from outside it can look more like, oh, like we don't have the ability to actually do this ourselves, or more dependent. But being able to actually see people like yourself doing something is often just so valuable, kind of similar to women in STEM, seeing a woman who's accomplished so much, seeing what they've done. It's so inspiring to younger girls too, to be able to say like, wow, like she can do it, so can I. Like I'll take inspiration from this. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, seeing someone who followed kind of like the same steps as you to get somewhere can be really incredible and can be really life changing for a lot of people.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think sovereignty, right, brings dignity.
Yeah,
Right? Like, I mean, I think that's kind of what we're talking about. And like in general, we as like humans, we want to look around and be like, that person kind of looks like me.
yeah,
And they did it too, which is I think a really important part of like why we have to empower lots of different kinds of folks who look different from each other in these fields, right? Like if I look around and I don't see anybody who looks like me, which quite frankly, I didn't when I was younger me. Like I never really had like a mentor, someone who really just was like, I am gonna help you and I am gonna make this like I never really had that. The only people who really attempted to mentor me at all were actually older men in my field. And I was kind of like, yeah, like you look like me, but you're not gonna be having a baby. Like, how's this gonna happen? And so like looking around and like seeing people like that I can do this, just like you were saying, like that's really important. And so, we have to surround ourselves, all of us collectively, with I mean, lots of different kinds of people. Frankly, it gets a more innovative solution as well. But like that's how we continue to kind of grow like a sustaining population of scientists who have creativity and ingenuity. And, it's just really, really important.
exactly, exactly. I could not agree more. When people talk about vaccine access, they often focus on the distribution aspect of it, but you're very focused on manufacturing. So, where does the real like bottleneck happen here? So, like, what is like the main constraint?
Goodness, there are so many. I mean, distribution is really important, but like, let's go back to COVID, right? Because again, what we were talking about earlier on today about kind of Africa and its ability or lack of ability to vaccinate its own population is really important. When you don't have your own manufacturing capacity, you don't have the ability to make product for your own population, right? So, what did Africa do during the COVID pandemic? Well, it had to appeal to foreign providers and manufacturers and companies and countries to try to get some of that bulk that they were making, largely for their own populations, to divert to South Africa. And the problem is in a situation like that, we're talking about like logistical challenge, right? I mean, that was certainly a problem, right? So that just creates like a time barrier, right? But then it became like a procurement barrier based on cost, right? Because like eventually, I mean, you're a company. Yeah, hopefully you want to do the right thing and just help people get the product they need. But like you're a business, your goal is to make money. And that's not inherently a bad thing, right? I mean, that's how you stay open. So eventually you're going to sell to the person who pays you the most, right? Like, I mean, it's like basic economic principles, right? So I mean, I think this is part of the challenge, right? When you have the ability to make that bulk that goes into the product, right? Then you can control how you're using it. You also then you're also paying your own population to make it. So all of those dollars are staying inside of your system. I mean, going back to what I said about Africa, like the healthcare related trade deficit that Africa as a continent takes on is huge, right? I mean, think about all the product that they're paying externally for that they're not empowering their own workforce to make, right? I mean, that's really hard. So, the what does that do to their GDP? Well, it just means that all of their GDP is coming from other sources, right? But again, that's creating a deficit. So, that's part of why we are really passionate about in country, for country manufacturing, because health and wellness creation goes along with job creation and, um, you know, actual like income earning potential, right? I mean, there's a lot more that's going on here, right? And that those are really, really important things to ultimately work together for the health of a region.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying about, businesses at the end of the day typically wanting to sell to whoever can pay the most, it's also about like if you have a higher valued business or company, then you can reach more people too. So I guess it's like that trade-off kind of not always being able to help the people who need it the most, but also doing what you can to make sure your business can help more people in the long run. So I think that is just like a thing in economics where you have to kind of make those cost benefit trade-offs.
It's a tension. It's a
Yeah.
tension, right? I mean, and again, like, I'll highlight one of the things about our business that's unique. We're a public benefit corporation. So we are a special kind of for-profit C corp that has also designated a public benefit as part of our articles of incorporation. What does that mean? Ultimately, it doesn't mean a whole lot. We're a for-profit company, but what it means is that we have to cover on both our fiduciary responsibilities and our public benefit, which is to improve the health and wellness globally for humans and animals using our products and services, right? So those two things combine to basically say we're going to do well as a business by doing good, right? Well, I mean, in the end, what it means is that sometimes we're going to make decisions to do things like give money away, right? Like if we have a surplus in the past in the business, we will give money away to other organizations that are doing things that we think are improving health and wellness in the geographies that we care about, both here in the US and in Africa, right? Or we run a civic engagement program. A whole group of us from the business are going to go and pack backpacks for Cradles to Crayons this upcoming Wednesday because we think this is important. Like serving our neighbors is really important. So it's one of those things where like ultimately we're a for-profit business. Yes. But, you can give more money away if you earn more money. So, like, let's be a successful business because we have to be. But then let's think about how to use that success to benefit more people around us, right? It's just an alternative way of thinking. And there are many other large companies that have chosen this designation too. So, I mean, it's not like it's unique to us, though it's pretty atypical in the biotech space.
Yeah, I actually didn't know what that was before you just mentioned it. So, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's so cool that you guys can use the profit that you're making to actually help grow the community. rather than just, a singular business. So I think that's so important to kind of like lift all of these different businesses and companies and like efforts together so that you can really just grow as a community. So I want to shift a little bit into the science behind all of this because I think that's where a lot of people will get curious. So biological medicines are very different from traditional drugs. So what makes protein manufacturing so technically challenging compared to making something like a standard pill?
Yeah, it's a great question. The difference between making a chemical API, so effectively an active pharmaceutical ingredient, from a biologically derived medicine like a protein based product, and that, just to give context, some examples of that might be like insulin, right? Or GLP-1s, that's like all over the place right now, right? Or monoclonal antibodies that maybe some of your family members are taking to treat RA or some other kind of chronic condition. The main difference is in one case, we're talking about a chemical small molecule. And in the other case, we're talking about a biopolymer. All the examples I just gave are proteins, though there are other biologically derived drugs that are made by cells. And that's the difference. We're using cells as a factory to make those biopolymer products, right? And so as an organic chemist, right, as a grad student, I did mostly the first thing. I made small molecules in the lab with solvents and, which is frankly, it's kind of like cooking, right? You use like really fancy glassware and things that you can't eat and touch but what we're doing on making biologic drugs is we are using cells at factories. And so we actually have to control the biology. And that is a challenge, right? Because biology is subtle, right? And very small changes in things like the temperature you do that at, or the pH, or the kind of food you feed the cells. Like really tiny changes in any of those things can actually impact both the productivity of those cells as factories and also the outcome, like the quality of what they're making. So that's kind of the critical difference there.
Yeah, I think I don't know ton about like those biological chemical processes, but I think it's always so cool to just hear about these things, that I don't know a lot about. And yeah, that's a really interesting difference. And so I have another question kind of following up to that. Are there any new technologies or approaches in protein manufacturing that you're especially excited about right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question because the way that we're doing this at Sunflower is totally different than the way historically it has been done. We are experts in using microbial cells to produce proteins of interest, which is not new. I mean, insulin, the global insulin supply is made in a yeast organism, right? Many different kinds of cytokines and growth factors that are used as therapies are made in bacteria or other yeast. So that in itself isn't new, but the way that we are deploying those bioprocesses is really new. And what we're doing is a method of continuous operations that is new. Continuous means that you're able to continuously feed the cells and continuously pull off waste product. And the process that we're actually executing is called perfusion. And perfusion has historically not existed for microbes. So we've actually developed special technology at Sunflower that enables this to happen inside of our bioreactors and does it in a way that is really intuitive for a user so that they don't actually really have to understand how to control that. The hardware itself controls that process. But this is like totally different to the way that fermentation is usually done. And fermentation just means using a microbe in a tank to make something that you care about, right? So typically fermentation is done in a way that's called batch or fed batch, which means we stick all those cells in a tank and we just give them some food, but nothing actually leaves the tank. Right. So the cells stay in there, they make the product stays with them, and those cells are just like sitting in their own waste, actually. So after like a few days, they just kind of can't do that anymore because actually they're kind of just like people and they don't like sitting in their dirty bath water. So after a few days, they kind of decide, nope, I'm all done. This isn't going to work for me anymore. And that's actually when people harvest the product. What we're doing for continuous operations, as I mentioned, we're continuously feeding that biomass. So we're feeding it all the time and we're pulling off its waste product all the time. So those cells can stay in that environment inside of the bioreactor that's their happy place for a long time, like weeks at a time and still be productive. So that does some really important things. It means that that volume of the bioreactor can be smaller while delivering a bigger output. And it also means that the output itself, which we call the space time yield, right? The amount of product that's coming out in a given amount of time for a given amount of fluid is way higher. So it's just more productive. So these are some advances in the actual bioprocessing for the fermentation that are totally unique to the market segment.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Wow. Yeah, and in science and research, it's always so important to make those effectively like improvements to what already exists. So what you guys are
Mhm.
doing, just making production more effective. That's really cool. So once you have a process that works in the lab, what's the hardest part about actually scaling it so that it becomes reliable in the real world?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it is making sure that you understand how the raw materials, so all the ingredients that are going into that process, are impacting what comes out, right? Because in one of the major differences between like a bioprocess and like chemical manufacturing, the raw materials are pretty, I don't want to say they're easy to define for chemistry, but they are of known precision, right? I'm buying the organic material and it's 99% pure and it's been tested for da, 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 da. Like it's going to work, right? A lot of the raw materials that go into a bioprocess, sometimes they can be a bit variable. And so, but small changes, as I mentioned, can have big changes for biology, right? So sometimes you'll have a raw material that's like a food source, for example, for the cells, and it might have a tiny bit of contamination of like a transition metal, right? Maybe it has a little more iron in it than it should have, or even like weird things like tungsten, a little more and that actually creates a really different output in the biology that changes something about the quality of the product. So I would say probably one of the biggest challenges is mapping that like raw material to quality of the output, right? Intentionally, like so for the field as a whole, just the process of taking a bioprocess and moving it between locations is usually really, really hard because most of the time that requires a large level of like human engagement to learn the new process. And this is something else that Sunflower has done that's pretty different than a lot of our kind of competitors or other incumbents. Almost everything about our process is deployed by software. So when you have software do the process and do the control, it will be the same every time. So like if I do it here in Boston or if I pick it up and have my friends do it in South Africa, it's going to be the same, right? And so we call that technology transfer. So a lot of times in like the rest of the market segment, it's the technology transfer that is so hard. And that is, I don't want to say it's like a solved problem for us, but like it is way easier when you're automated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, that totally makes sense that, doing something with a computer would make sure that it's consistent, which is so important. So, yeah, that's really cool. I'd love to talk a little bit more about being a woman in a field like this. You've spent so much of your career in environments where women are often the minority, labs, biotech companies, government programs. What did navigating those spaces look like early on in your career?
I mean, early on or now. I mean, I wish I could say that things have changed, but they haven't. I'm sorry to tell you. It's just as hard, frankly, now as it was when I was a young female scientist. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it for me was learning to not really care what other people think, right? Like, I'm not there to please everyone else. Like, I have a calling and, I'm going to try to fulfill my calling, right? And like some people aren't going to like that and they're not necessarily going to like the way that I do it or the way that I look while I'm doing it, right? Like, and I can't really do anything about that, and so just being willing to like keep going, like one foot in front of the other, even if people around me are gonna talk trash or be discouraging or actively discriminate, right? This is part of what I love about your podcast name. Like just persist. Like just decide that none of that is actually important, that noise that's going on out there, and just keep doing the thing you can do today.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying is so important, like really just like stand your ground and like realize that this is your passion and
Yep.
someone else shouldn't tell you if you can pursue it or not. So yeah, as long as have that drive and that passion, then you can obviously do the same thing that any male scientist can do. So I think that's so important.
Yeah, and it's gonna be hard. I mean, to be honest, like, you know, people have said some really horrible things to me throughout my career. Unfortunately, both men and women, because actually sometimes women are really horrible to other women, right? I mean, in part just because I think there's this sense of scarcity of resources. Like, oh my gosh, like I can't let this other woman get ahead of me. Like it's already hard enough, like, which is just silly, right? I mean,
Yeah,
frankly, it's just silly for people in general. Like we should want everyone to be the best
to do
version of
better. Yeah.
themselves, irrespective of their gender or anything else, right? But yeah, I mean, there's real discouragement out there. And, some days some days you go home and cry. And then you think, okay, well, tomorrow's a new day. What am I going to do now?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's so important to realize that part of being a woman in STEM, or not even a woman in STEM, part of being anyone in STEM is that there will be hard days. And it's just having enough motivation and enough passion for what you're doing to want to work through those and not to feel like you have to, but that you actually want to. So I
hmm
think, yeah, that's such an important message that you just gave.
I think it's I think it's great that you acknowledge that so young and in kind of your path, Emma, because 99% of what you do as a scientist is going to fail.
Yeah.
It just is. I mean,
I think that's
that's
just
just the way it
research.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, you can't basically decide like, "Oh, well, then I will just attach my joy to the 1% of the time that that works." Well,
Exactly.
then you're never gonna have any joy, right? Like, so you have to, like, find a way that this is actually gonna work for you.
Yeah, no, one of my favorite quotes, is it's something along the lines of, failure is just finding another way that it won't work. So it's not like you just found out that it won't work. It's just one way that it won't work, which means there is a way that it will work. So I think, yeah, it's just always important to keep that in mind and realize, especially in research, the reason it is research is because you're like finding something new, and that's not going to come easy, unfortunately, most of the time.
That's true in business too, though.
Hmm.
So, like, I think that's the thing that I didn't realize, right? I kind of attributed all of this, like, yes, that's true in science, but actually running a business is an experiment. There's a ton of different ways to run a business. And just like you said, a lot of them are going to fail. So figuring out like how do you be agile enough and be willing to kind of change your own preconceived notions to
Hmm.
keep going and figure out the way to be successful.
Exactly. Well, Sunflower Therapeutics is women owned and women led. Has that shaped the culture of the company in any noticeable ways?
I mean, I would like to think so. I have some really incredible women leaders part of my management team. And I think, they work with me to kind of just set the tone for the business. Like we were talking about before, we have a lot of different people who look different and think differently. And I think it's great. And I think my female colleagues have really embraced that and, taken a lot of that on because it's part of their own identity and kind of modeled that, right? So, I think we really all together try to be servant leaders in the business. And, I certainly don't want to say that there's not a lot of men who also do the same because that's absolutely true. But, this particular group of women that I've had the pleasure to work with for a very long time now embodies that servant leadership in a really special way. And, I think our staff both see that and like buy into it, right? It's a bit of a self-selection process, right? I mean, people that, we invite to join our community also feel passionately about that, right? And they also like some of the things that we like civic engagement, right? I mean, some of these other things, right? So I think, yeah, it's definitely set the tone and flavor. I think one of the interesting aspects, which maybe you saw if you like went to our website and stuff, like we use a lot of color. It's bright and beautiful. Like when we go to conferences or in-person engagements, like people are always like, wow, like all of your things are so beautiful. And maybe that's a little bit of a female touch on that because we like colorful things.
I do have to ask, I actually just thought of this. What inspired the name of Sunflower Therapeutics?
Great question. Great question. So I named the business actually well before we like incorporated. And there were a lot of reasons that we decided to name the business Sunflower. One is that sunflowers are recognized world over as symbols of health and wellness. And we loved the idea that like one seed can grow a big hardy plant. But one of the other critical reasons that we like that is sunflowers actually grow everywhere in the world. So sunflowers grow on all the habitable continents of the planet, and anyone can grow a sunflower. Right. Like it doesn't actually matter if you're a gardener or not. If you plant the seed and water it, it's going to grow. My parents feed their birds sunflower seeds, right? They have a bird feeder and the birds inevitably drop them in the yard and those things spring up and grow big sunflowers, right? Like you don't have to work that hard at it. And we think that that should be true of bioprocess. Anyone who wants to do bioprocess wherever in the world should be able to do it. And so that's such a goal for us is to make it that intuitive and user friendly. So those are kind of some of the collective reasons that we chose that name.
I actually had no idea that the sunflower had that many meanings, but that is so cool. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's such like a meaningful name, like once you know like the concept behind it. So that's really cool. So when you're building teams for your company, what are some qualities that matter to you beyond just the technical skill?
Yeah, I love that question because frankly, I don't want to say that the technical skill isn't important, but like you can teach a coachable person to do lots of technical things. It's really those soft skills. So we actually we call them front wheel skills, right? Like if you're steering the bicycle, you need the front wheel. Like those are the non-technical skills and the rear wheel is like the driving, right? That's the technical thing. So those front wheel skills are so important. Number 1 is coachability, right? Like being part of a team means that you're not like me, my, right? Like that's so important. And a lot of that just has to do with humility. So, we're often looking for people who are actually superstars in their own right, and they're just willing to come in and like work with their colleagues, humble themselves, learn the way that we want to do things, be passionate about our collective mission. So those are all really important. Initiative, right? That is so important. Don't wait for me to ask you. Come tell me. Come tell me how we can do this better, right? If I have to ask you 3 times, that's a challenge, right? That was like 2 times too many, right? So I think initiative is really important, and just general passion, right? Like just excitement. I want people who, just like you said earlier, whatever you're doing, get excited about it, right? It's all pretty cool, Like so, let's just do it and do it with a smile, kind of bring joy to what we have together. But I think those 3 things are all really important.
Yeah, and I think those soft skills are really what, distinguish one person from the other. And like you said, people can be taught technical skills or they might already have those technical skills, but having the ability to actually work in a team when you're on a team is something that's so important. So, yeah. Um, but I'd love to kind of touch base on a little bit of more like reflective questions. So, when you look 10 years ahead, what success for Sunflower do you see?
Goodness gracious. I mean, I would like to actually have a facility installed in Africa that's deploying end-to-end biomanufacturing to make protein bulk. I hope we can accomplish that in 10 years. That would be an incredible success. And actually, I hope that a whole different group of people is running it, right? And that is not, actually just my staff transplanted, right? I hope that what we've done is we've actually helped create an enterprise that can start to show people that they can do this for themselves. I think that would be fantastic. I mean, along with that, I would hope that material that we have helped to make is actually in human patients, right? Because that's a critical part of that, right? We're still looking for clinical manufacturing opportunities right now. We've made material that's gone into animals, actually. We actually recently supported one of our collaborating biotech companies did a first in dog study for a canine cancer treatment, and we made that material and the study went great. But we haven't had the opportunity yet to make material for human clinical evaluation. So, that's definitely on the path if we're looking 10 years out and we actually have a facility that's doing that regularly. So I think those are two really critical things that I believe we will be able to achieve.
Yeah, and those would be huge. Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. So I didn't know you guys are doing work with animals too. That's really cool.
Yeah, well, animal health. Animal health is
Yeah,
important. So this is for companion animals, right? This is actually for pets.
that's
But,
awesome.
animal health is human health, right?
Yeah,
So, we think that things like livestock vaccines, that is really important, right? Because that's an important food source. So, yeah, yeah, animal
that
health.
is so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So for a young woman who's listening to this episode who's interested in science or business or connecting the both, but unsure about how to approach it, what would you want her to hear?
Well, I mean, first, I think I would want her to know that, like, she can do it, right? Like, is possible. It's not going to be easy, right? But, like, nothing that's worth doing is actually easy. And, she's gonna have to persist. And so in all of that, she's gotta find community around her, right? Like, what does that look like, right? Is it a mentor? Is it just someone else who's, like, walking the path next to her, right? And that might be another woman in STEM. It might be a guy, like another guy in STEM. I mean, my most powerful mentors and allies have actually all been men. And so she needs to build community, and she needs to regularly engage in, you know, opportunities that show her different kinds of experiences and, like, what that's gonna look like. Like, for a really long time, I thought I wanted to be an academic, right? Actually, like, that's not the right place for me. So there's so many different opportunities, and getting to see examples of that and interacting with people who have those jobs is really important and formative to knowing where ultimately you wanna sit. I think the other thing that I tell all young people, women, whomever, is any decision you make, you can unmake, okay? Like, that's the other thing is, like, don't feel like, "Oh my gosh, I'm choosing this path. It is now set in stone. This is the way I'm headed." Like, I think that's perhaps the most critical thing to for someone kind of going down these roads to know is, like, it's okay if you get, like, a few years in and you're like, "Wait a minute, this is not for me." Or, "Yeah, I've been studying whatever, science, but there's this other thing that's just a lot more interesting to me, right? I mean, I'm an organic chemist, I'm a carbohydrate chemist, and I'm running a company that develops hardware for bioprocess. Those are, I mean, they're not totally unrelated, but they're not necessarily particularly related, right? You can make different choices all the time, and you should.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you said, first off, about like engaging with not only other women in STEM, but also men in STEM too. I think it's so important to recognize that while it is unfortunate that women are underrepresented in STEM, that kind of, as of right now at least, does happen to be, the case. That doesn't mean that you can only engage with other women in STEM or that you should only want to. It's so important to be able to approach and be engaged with all of these different kinds of people, whether that be men, women, whoever, or whether they be from a different country or a different background. And just recognizing that STEM really is a pretty diverse place. And it's definitely growing in diversity. It's not as diverse as it could be, but it's I think it's making some advancements to becoming a more diverse
Yeah,
place.
it's a
Yeah.
process,
It
right? It's a
definitely, yeah, it's a
process.
long process, and it's gonna take a while until it's, closer to 50 women men, women ratio, but that doesn't have to be a discouraging thing all the time. It can be just as powerful, like you said, having a male mentor who's really there to support you as it can be to have a female mentor. So yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that's incredibly important. And also what you said about just not feeling stuck in an environment, being able to realize that maybe you chose a path that isn't necessarily something you want to pursue for the rest of your life and being able to like recognize and sometimes it is a risk that you're taking, but recognizing that some of those risks are worth taking if it means that you're going to end up going down a road that you think you'd be more passionate about. Yeah, I think that those are both really great messages. Very last question is, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Goodness.
I know
I
it's a
would give
big question.
I would give my younger self so much advice. So, like, one thing is not gonna sum it up. Yeah, oh gosh, that's it's such a good question, but, like, I think for me, I am a very passionate person, and I have a lot of strong feelings, even though I think I'm fairly rational and level-headed. I think I would wanna tell myself that, which I've had to learn over time, feelings are a sign of something, but they're not the truth. So when you're feeling something about a situation, it's telling you something. It is, but you have to like step back a little bit and really see what's going on. And, for me, I had to really learn patience as well, right? And so having the patience to like take a little bit of time and evaluate a situation, right? Based on my feelings has been so helpful in learning to manage people, learning to steer my business in the right direction, engaging with external, collaborators or stakeholders or whatever. But like my younger self just wanted to be like knee jerk response, immediate. Like, no, like it's okay. Just like stop, think your thoughts, and then think about what's actually going on around you so that you can really be as productive in all of those, relationships and like interpersonal engagements as you need to be.
Yeah, and I think taking that step back and really thinking about a situation is something that we often want to skip that part, but it's so important. So, yeah, I think that's a really great message. But Kerry, thank you so much for being here. The work that you're doing with Sunflower is incredible and it's so impactful, and I can't wait to see where it's going to head in the future. You spoke with like a lot of passion and a lot of experience and just a lot of like impact on something that I think listeners will carry with them.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, for everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who you think needs to hear it and leave us a review on your favorite streaming platform. Thank you so much for tuning into the She Persists podcast. And until next time, keep persisting. Once again, I'm your host, Emma Zareen, and thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the She Persists podcast.